It was a cold November night in New York City. The year was 1995. A discovery was made in a squalid Manhattan apartment. A discovery that would expose the dark underbelly of the city's child protection system. The discovery was the lifeless body of 6-year-old Elisa Izquierdo, a little girl with bright eyes and an infectious smile. Her life brutally cut short by an unimaginable act of cruelty. How could this happen? How could a child be so brutally abused and neglected under the watchful eye of the city's child protection services? The city demanded answers and justice. Elisa's story became a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of children. It became a symbol of a system that had failed to protect one of its most vulnerable members. The city grappled with the horrific details of Elisa's abuse. Elisa had suffered unimaginable abuse at the hands of her own mother, the one person who was supposed to love and protect her. But Elisa's home was anything but safe. It was a prison, a torture chamber, a place where her innocence was stolen, a place where her spirit was broken. And the city wept for Elisa and the system that failed her, and it wept for the countless other children suffering in silence. Elisa's death sparked outrage. It sparked a demand for change. The city questioned how a system designed to protect children could fail so spectacularly. How could so many warning signs be ignored? How could so many cries for help go unanswered? The answer was a complex web of systemic failures, a lack of resources, a lack of communication, a lack of accountability. The system was broken, but from the ashes of tragedy, hope emerged. Elisa's death became a catalyst for reform. Her story, though heartbreaking, ignited a movement demanding justice and a better future for all children. Elisa Izquierdo was born into a world filled with promise. It was June 11th, 1989, a day like any other in the bustling metropolis of New York City. Elisa was a bright and cheerful baby. Her laughter was infectious. Her smile could light up a room. Those who knew her as a baby remember her as a happy child, full of life and energy. As Elisa grew, so did her spirit. She was a curious and playful child, eager to explore the world around her. She loved to sing and dance, but Elisa's world was not always a happy one. As Elisa grew older, her home life became increasingly unstable. Her parents' relationship was tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments and periods of separation. Elisa's father, Gustavo, struggled with addiction. He was often absent, leaving Awilda to care for Elisa alone. Awilda, overwhelmed and ill-equipped to handle the situation, began to show signs of instability herself. Elisa, caught in the middle of her parents' struggles, began to withdraw. The once bubbly and outgoing child became increasingly quiet and withdrawn. She was often seen with bruises and scratches, which Awilda would dismiss as accidents or the result of Elisa's clumsiness. The shadows were closing in on Elisa's life, and the system that was supposed to protect her remained oblivious. Awilda Lopez, once a loving and devoted mother, began a slow and tragic descent into a state of mental and emotional instability. Overwhelmed by the challenges of single parenthood, the pressures of poverty, and the strain of Gustavo's addiction, she began to unravel. Awilda's behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. She was prone to violent outbursts, often directed at Elisa. Neighbors reported hearing Elisa's screams late at night, followed by Awilda's harsh scolding. As Awilda's mental state deteriorated, so did the condition of their apartment. Garbage piled up. Dirty dishes overflowed from the sink. Elisa, trapped in this nightmare, became a convenient target for Awilda's rage and frustration. She was subjected to increasingly cruel and unusual punishments. Despite the escalating abuse, Elisa's cries for help went largely unanswered. Neighbors, though concerned, were hesitant to intervene. School officials noticed Elisa's injuries and reported their suspicions to Child Protective Services. Caseworkers visited the apartment on several occasions, but Awilda was often able to convince them that Elisa's injuries were accidental. The system, bogged down by bureaucracy and a lack of resources, failed to connect the dots. Elisa was failed by the very system that was designed to protect her. Her pleas for help were ignored, and the consequences of this neglect would prove to be fatal. The year 1994 marked a turning point in Elisa's young life. The incidents of abuse, once sporadic, became more frequent and severe. Awilda's mental state continued to deteriorate, and Elisa bore the brunt of her mother's rage. Neighbours reported hearing Elisa's screams more frequently. Her once bright eyes, now often clouded with fear and sadness, hinted at the horrors she was enduring behind closed doors. Elisa began to withdraw further from the world. Her attendance at school became erratic. Her childhood, meant to be a time of joy and wonder, had become a living nightmare. The summer of 1995 would prove to be a fateful one for Elisa. With school out of session, she was trapped in her apartment, isolated from the outside world and at the mercy of her increasingly unstable mother. The abuse escalated to unimaginable levels. Elisa was subjected to regular beatings, often with belts or electrical cords. She was deprived of food and water. Neighbours reported hearing Elisa's desperate cries for help echoing through the hallways of their apartment building. But their pleas for help, like those of Elisa herself, went unanswered. Her spirit, though broken, clung desperately to life. Despite numerous reports to Child Protective Services, Elisa remained trapped in her abusive home. The system, overwhelmed and understaffed, failed to connect the dots. Awilda, skilled at manipulating those around her, was able to convince caseworkers that Elisa's injuries were the result of accidents or her own clumsiness. The system, blinded by its own bureaucracy and a lack of resources, failed to see through Awilda's lies. Elisa's case was a tragic example of a systemic failure to protect vulnerable children. In the aftermath of Elisa Izquierdo's death, a chilling truth emerged. It wasn't just one catastrophic failure that led to her demise, it was a series of errors, a cascade of missed opportunities and a systemic inability to effectively protect a vulnerable child. Reports to Child Protective Services painted a horrifying picture of Elisa's life. Each report a desperate plea for help, but the pieces of the puzzle, though present, were never fully assembled. The severity of Elisa's abuse, the urgency of her situation, became lost in a bureaucratic maze of paperwork, procedures, and a lack of communication between agencies. Teachers, neighbours, and concerned citizens had all raised red flags. Yet the lines between suspicion, evidence, and action remained blurred. Elisa's case exposed a systemic failure to adequately address the complexities of child abuse. Every call to Child Protective Services, every report filed, presented an opportunity to intervene in Elisa's life. Yet time and time again, these opportunities were missed. Caseworkers, often overwhelmed with unmanageable caseloads, were ill-equipped to conduct thorough investigations. Awilda, adept at concealing the abuse and manipulating those around her, presented a facade of normalcy that masked the horrors inflicted upon her daughter. The lack of communication between agencies proved equally detrimental. Schools, hospitals, and social service agencies, though each holding pieces of Elisa's story, operated in silos. The missed opportunities to save Elisa were not for lack of concern, but rather a systemic failure to effectively share information and recognize the escalating pattern of abuse. Proving child abuse presents a unique challenge. Often the only witnesses are the victim and the abuser. Children, particularly those as young as Elisa, may lack the vocabulary or understanding to articulate the horrors they endure. Fear, intimidation, and a natural desire to protect their abuser further complicate matters, creating a wall of silence that can be difficult to penetrate. The burden of proof, often falling on the shoulders of caseworkers and social workers, becomes an insurmountable hurdle. Physical evidence, though present in Elisa's case, was often dismissed as accidental. The system's inability to effectively address the complex dynamics of child abuse contributed to the tragic reality that justice for children like Elisa often came too late. The child welfare system, tasked with protecting the most vulnerable members of society, is often stretched to its breaking point. Overwhelmed by a constant influx of cases, understaffed and underfunded, it struggles to keep pace with the demands placed upon it. This chronic state of overload played a significant role in the systemic failures that ultimately failed Elisa. Caseworkers, burdened with unmanageable caseloads, are forced to prioritize cases based on perceived risk. This triage approach, while necessary given the limited resources, can result in cases like Elisa's, where the abuse is ongoing but not immediately life-threatening, falling through the cracks. Inadequate resources translate to fewer caseworkers, limited training opportunities, and a reliance on outdated systems and technology. These systemic failures that plagued Elisa's case were not simply a matter of individual negligence, but rather a reflection of a system buckling under the weight of its own unsustainable workload. A system that, despite the best intentions of those working within it, was ill-equipped to protect a child in desperate need of its help. The tragic death of Elisa Izquierdo exposed a harsh reality. That child abuse often thrives in an environment of indifference. It festers behind closed doors, hidden from public view, and is easily ignored by those who choose not to see it. This societal apathy, this willingness to look away, played a significant role in Elisa's fate. Neighbors, though aware of the disturbances coming from Elisa's apartment, hesitated to get involved. Fear of retaliation, a sense of helplessness, and a belief that someone else would take action allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. This bystander effect, while understandable, allowed Elisa's suffering to remain hidden in plain sight. The media, though quick to sensationalize Elisa's story and death, often failed to adequately cover the issue of child abuse while she was alive. Elisa's story serves as a chilling reminder that child abuse is not simply a private matter, but rather a societal issue that demands our attention. Only by confronting this uncomfortable truth, by demanding better for our children, can we hope to prevent future tragedies and ensure that no child suffers in silence. As City Mourns, the news of Elisa Izquierdo's death sent shockwaves through New York City. The horrific details of her abuse and the systemic failures shook the city to its core. Strangers united in sorrow created a makeshift memorial. Elisa's story resonated deeply with New Yorkers. Her death forced the city to confront the uncomfortable truth of child abuse. Elisa's death became a catalyst for change and a rallying cry for reform. The grief that engulfed New York City soon gave way to outrage as the details of Elisa's case unfolded, revealing a litany of missed opportunities and systemic failures. Public anger grew. The city demanded answers, accountability, and most importantly, justice for Elisa. Protests erupted across the city, with thousands marching through the streets demanding reform of the child welfare system. Parents, educators, and concerned citizens voiced their anger and frustration, calling for increased funding, improved training for caseworkers, and greater transparency within the system. The media, initially focused on the sensational aspects of the case, shifted its attention to the systemic issues that allowed Elisa's abuse to continue unabated. Newspapers published scathing editorials, television news programs aired investigative reports, and talk shows dedicated hours to discussing the failings of the child welfare system. Elisa's case became a lightning rod for change, galvanizing the city and forcing its leaders to confront a broken system. The public outcry, fueled by grief, anger, and a demand for justice, created a moment of reckoning, a demand for accountability, and a renewed commitment to protecting the city's most vulnerable citizens. The public outcry over Elisa Izquierdo's death, the relentless demands for justice and reform, did not go unanswered. In 1996, just 1 year after Elisa's death, New York State passed Elisa's Law, a landmark piece of legislation designed to overhaul the state's child welfare system. Elisa's Law introduced sweeping changes, aimed at preventing future tragedies and ensuring that no child would ever again slip through the cracks. The law mandated increased funding for child protective services, reduced caseloads for individual caseworkers, and implemented mandatory training programs to improve their ability to recognize and respond to signs of abuse. The law also strengthened reporting requirements, making it easier for teachers, doctors, and other professionals who interact with children to report suspected abuse. Additionally, it created a statewide database to track abuse reports, ensuring that crucial information was shared between agencies, preventing cases from falling through the cracks due to a lack of communication. Elisa's Law, a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring legacy of a young girl whose life was tragically cut short, became a model for child welfare reform across the nation. It served as a reminder that while systems can fail, the fight for justice and the unwavering commitment to protecting children must never cease. The passage of Elisa's Law marked a significant victory in the fight against child abuse, but it did not signal the end of the struggle. The battle to protect children is ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and advocacy. Despite increased funding, child welfare agencies face challenges. High caseloads, turnover rates, and complex issues like poverty and substance abuse persist. Protecting children requires addressing both abuse symptoms and societal problems. This includes investing in education, housing, healthcare, and support systems. Elisa Izquierdo's legacy is a reminder of the ongoing fight for child welfare. It requires collective efforts to ensure every child is safe and valued. Elisa Izquierdo should be remembered not for the horrors she endured, but for the light that shone brightly within her short life. She was a little girl who loved to sing and dance, who found joy in simple pleasures. Though her story ended in tragedy, her memory reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of cruelty, Elisa's spirit endured. She clung to hope, believing someone would rescue her. Her death ignited outrage, forcing a city to confront child abuse. Elisa's story, filled with pain, is ultimately a story of hope. Each of us bears a responsibility to be guardians of innocence, to protect the children in our lives and communities. Child abuse thrives in silence, in the shadows of indifference. It demands a collective response, a unified front against harm. We must be the voices for those silenced by fear, advocates for the trapped. Challenge the status quo, demand accountability, support prevention. Silence is not an option when protecting our children. Speak out against injustice, create a culture where abuse is not tolerated. Educate ourselves, report suspicions, support survivors. The fight against child abuse is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires sustained effort and unwavering commitment. The time for complacency is over. The time for action is now. We must channel our grief, our anger, and our determination into meaningful change. We must demand better for our children, for our communities, and for our future. If you suspect a child is being abused, do not hesitate to report it. Your call could save a life. Familiarize yourself with the signs of abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual, and be vigilant in your observations. Children often struggle to articulate their experiences, so it is up to us to recognize the subtle cues and offer support. Get involved in your community. Support organizations working to prevent child abuse and provide services to victims and their families. Volunteer your time, donate to worthy causes, and advocate for policies that prioritize the well-being of children. Together, we can create a world where every child is safe, loved, and cherished. We can break the cycle of abuse and build a future where Elisa's story, though never forgotten, serves as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of collective action, and a reminder that the fight for justice and the protection of innocence is a fight worth fighting.